Hey everybody, happy Wednesday. What's good? What's going on? JB here with another CyberInsight live stream video. Appreciate you guys taking the time to drop in here today. For today's video, we're kind of going to be building off of a topic that I did a video on a couple of weeks ago, where I broke down a job rec for a service desk position. And I seem to get an awful lot of positive feedback from that video and some additional questions. And some of the feedback I got back was other folks were interested in me kind of doing the same thing, but from the perspective of a network engineer job posting. So I figure why not do that? I mean, network engineering is really where my background in IT came from. And yeah, anytime anybody wants to talk about network engineering in general, I mean, that makes me happy. So really looking forward to this. We're gonna kind of dive in and try and break things down a little bit because I think that there's some stuff. I mean, and this is completely applicable across everything within IT, but also within network engineering, where some of the information that's in these job postings makes sense to those of us who have been in for a while and kind of understand how a lot of the different requirements kind of lay on top of each other or have different interactions with other job responsibilities and things like that. And some of those things might not necessarily be very apparent to new folks who are trying to get in or aren't necessarily as familiar with how these job recs are written and really what an employer is looking for. So in today's video, we're going to go ahead and do that, except, like I said, from the perspective of you wanting to be a network engineer and kind of the things that are specifically aligned with that. So before we hop into that, I always say this, and I appreciate those who do this. If you do enjoy this content, please hit the like button. And if you want to keep seeing more and more of the stuff that I'm putting out, then I definitely appreciate it if you subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're also streaming on Twitch today. Still trying to work out some of the kinks in that. So if you are watching via the Twitch stream and you aren't having any issues or anything like that, drop me a comment so I know that everything is working good there. Kind of ran into an interesting thing where Twitch doesn't like folks streaming in 4K. They think that that's abusing their system a bit much. So had to do some throttling through Restream for all the stuff that's going to Twitch. Meanwhile, on the YouTube side, we're still going full 4K, which is awesome. So yeah, let me hop over into my browser and we'll bring up the job rec that I want to talk about. If you have any questions, please drop them as we're going along, and yeah, we'll talk about whatever questions you guys have. So, all right, let me move over here. Okay, so this position now, like just like last time, I just went to Indeed and did a job search on network engineer, and I did it kind of near where I'm at in Northern Virginia, and went through and tried to find a job rec that I thought kind of encompassed all of the different responsibilities and duties that would make sense. Now, the first thing that we kind of look at here is that this is a network engineer one position. So this is more of, I don't like to use the word entry level when talking about an engineer position. So let's say junior. This is more of a junior network engineer slot. And that's also something that's important to realize, especially as you're getting into IT, is that you more likely than not are not going to be jumping into an engineer position. And so if you kind of have a desire or you're kind of pulled towards the networking realm, you're probably going to be starting to look at positions that are more network administrators instead of network engineers. Not saying that you couldn't jump into a network engineer position. Really depends upon where you are, your skill set that you've built up, maybe some certifications that you've gotten, and obviously your skills in that. I wouldn't want to say somebody couldn't start off as a network engineer. I mean, heck, you could really just love network engineering and you go and study, you get a CCNA and a CCNP and have never worked in the industry before, and you might be able to go in and talk your way through and impress some folks and start off as a network engineer. But for the majority of us, if we want to start off down that networking path, we're going to be doing a network admin role. But don't worry, there's a lot of kind of overlap between the skills that you have as a network admin, and you build those up, and those kind of roll into an engineer role, which really means that you're able to take those technical skills and overlay a little bit of project development and project management type of stuff. So MC Dean is the company that we are looking at here who has this job rec. Those of you who aren't familiar with MC Dean, they do a whole bunch of different work, both from a telecommunications perspective and a physical security perspective. So they might design different types of monitoring solutions for businesses, implement fiber optic cabling, implement some LAN services as well. Their headquarters are actually not that far down the street from where I'm at. So I actually drive by their building almost every day, or at least their headquarters building. And so this particular job, if we look under the duties and responsibilities, you're going to be maintaining existing network that is both IP services and VoIP for the Baltimore Convention Center. So I'm assuming that the Baltimore Convention Center is a client of theirs, and they have some FTEs or full-time employees that support this particular client. And what do they want you to do? Design, configure, monitor, do a little bit of integrating and implementing different types of devices within the environment. I mean, those are things that you would expect an engineer level network engineer to be able to do. So let's talk a little bit about what that actually means from a skill set perspective, and also what that means as far as the actual type of work that you'll be doing. And so we'll start off just like we did with the help desk job rec. We're looking at the job description, and I'm going to talk about, at least from my perspective, reading this, what I think it is that they're actually looking for. So before we jump into that, if anybody has any questions or comments, drop those. I'm going to take a quick sip of water. And let me, over here, just pull up. Also, already have some comments and stuff coming in. I'm going to hold on to your questions until we get through this a little bit more, and then I'll bring them all up, okay? But definitely do see a whole bunch of comments. Ability to prove that it's not the network. It's just the way that it is. Everybody always blames the network, always blames firewalls. And more often than not, it's not going to be that. I mean, normally if it is the network, it's going to affect everything. And yeah, more often than not, it's DNS. So let's see. Cross-connecting patch panels, installing hardware and other equipment. So do you know what a patch panel is? If you haven't worked in an operational environment, you've probably never seen one, and you might not know exactly what that is. But understanding physical cabling, how to connect devices, the different types of connectors, different limitations on different types of cabling would be important to understand there. Why documentation when it comes to that is going to be important. I'm guessing, because I haven't actually really read through this yet, that documentation is probably going to be something that they're going to hit on a lot. And I will say documentation research are two things that you as a network engineer need to be really, really good at. You could have all the networking skills in the world. You could be able to build out beautiful MPLS networks that have, internal and external BGP, doing all sorts of crazy, funky IPv6 stuff. And if you suck at documenting, you're not a very good network engineer, because you might be able to do it, but if you leave people in a bind and they can't understand what it is that you did because you don't document, yeah, you're doing a disservice to everybody else that you're working with. So always focus on documentation and being good at documentation. It will take you really, really far in your career. Installing hardware and other equipment. I mean, that's kind of self-explanatory there. Some of these things, you're not going to have experience with it until you actually do it, right? So um, if you've never worked in a place that had racks, then you don't necessarily know how to rack a network device or a server or any of that type of stuff. Understand why you want to have redundant power and have those going to different power supplies and all that type of stuff. But being able to talk about it is again important. And again, these are things that they do hit on the Network Plus. Assist senior network engineers to identify and resolve network security issues. So this is a good thing with being the junior level network engineer. You're going to be working in an environment where you have senior level network engineers. Your job is to work with them, to hopefully be mentored by them, and they're going to bring you along, get you up to speed. I've been lucky in my career. I've worked with an awful lot of really great senior network engineers that put me in a position to teach me things, to give me ownership over projects, and kind of build up my skill set and my confidence in things. So that's definitely, a plus. You don't, if you're going to be successful, and this is something that's applicable again to network engineers, but really all the way across the IT spectrum. If you can take ownership of something, whatever it is that you're tasked with, you take ownership of that task, you have pride in it, you don't, what's the word I want to use? You don't kind of just put it off and do the bare minimum. That's only going to benefit you because you are going to be gaining additional skills and experience, and also people will look to you and respect you more, which means that you will end up having other opportunities opened up for you. Flip side to that is you don't want to be the only person that's able to do stuff and rely too heavy on, and then you'll burn out. But that's a conversation for another time. You want to take the opportunities that you can to learn new things as often as you can. Researching new technologies in order to support analysis of existing systems. So what were the two things that I said were really important as a network engineer? Documentation and research. I probably do more time researching things than I do actually building something out, because the amount of time that you spend on the keyboard actually doing something, especially as an engineer compared to an administrator. As a network admin, you're constantly on the keyboard doing repetitive tasks over and over and over again. As an engineer, you're working on kind of continual service improvement within an organization. So that's going to be installing, configuring, looking for new ways to improve things, looking for ways to solve issues. And research is a big component of that. Install, configure, maintain network services, equipment, and devices. That's all pretty straightforward. Again, up to this point, they haven't mentioned vendors yet. They do mention Cisco later on. But yeah, as a network engineer, you're obviously expected to do those things. A lot of times you might not have experience with a particular type of device, but if you can speak to other experiences that you've had with similar devices or similar types of vendors, for instance, okay, I've worked with other Cisco devices, but I've never done Cisco firewalls, right? So talk about the experiences that you've had with the devices that you had. Or I've never done Cisco firewalls, but I've done Juniper firewalls. So I have, some understanding of how to configure firewalls and the basic principles behind those. Again, this is a junior level network engineer position. So however you can kind of paint your skills in a way where there's overlap with what they're looking for, that would be the way that I would approach it. Plans and supports network and computing infrastructure. Again, you're an engineer, you're not an administrator. This is where project planning and working through tasks from start to finish, documentation kind of comes into play here. A step up from being an administrator, or somebody just might hand you a config, tell you what you need to do. As an engineer, you're going to be the one who is taking that leadership role and ownership of that particular task. As I mentioned before, documentation. Documents, network problems, and resolution for future reference. In this case, they probably have a ticketing system or a wiki You want to make sure that you are providing really good notes and documenting things. Uh, I don't know, in a way, I don't necessarily want to say narrative, but you want to be giving as much information so that if somebody who wasn't with you when you were working on this has to go back and reference this, that it makes sense. And you're giving enough data to them to help them minimize future problems. Monitor system performance and implements performance tuning. Hopefully, you work in an environment where there's some type of monitoring tools. We talked about SolarWinds before. Um, Despite all the issues with SolarWinds, if you've heard me talk about it before, you know that I appreciate it as a monitoring tool set. It's pretty awesome. So figuring out what you need to monitor is important, figuring out how you're going to monitor it, setting up alerting that makes sense, and then researching and troubleshooting to figure out what you need to do to fix problems as they pop up. Monitor existing network for threats from within and outside the organization. Um, I mean, that's where we're starting to get a little bit into the cybersecurity aspect, depending upon the tool sets that you have, threat feeds, vulnerability management. That's really going to be dependent within the organization, the way that they go about doing that. But understanding that you need to do this, understanding the questions that you would ask, which, like those things that I just listed off, if they brought that up in an interview, then that would be the questions that I would ask them. Would be like, what tools do you currently have? What gaps do you think you have in your environment that we would, need to address to be able to make sure that we have full coverage? What threat feeds do you have? What other types of security tools do you have? What type of threats have you had in the past, right? Again, this goes back to when you're interviewing, it's not a bad idea for you to be asking them questions about the environment because it shows that you know how to be not only responsive but proactive. Must understand the overall network topology for including VoIP and telecommunication backbone networks. So by topology, I'm not quite sure what they mean there because obviously you won't understand their network. You could ask them questions about their topology. But I would say understanding WANs and understanding VoIP services, understanding that you need a call manager, understanding that you have hard phones, soft phones, the type of carrier lines that you have going out, if you're doing any translation between VoIP to PSTN, different types of WAN circuits, different types of protocols you use on WAN circuits. Again, those are all Network Plus type of things that they talk about. So if you have an understanding of those objectives, then you kind of know what questions to ask. Seeing a whole bunch of questions coming in, don't worry. We're almost through this list here, and then I'll get to your questions. Let's see. Able to work with other people in the group and support users. Yeah, so don't be an ass. Be supportive, especially as you coming in as a junior person. And as you go up through the chain and become more senior, continue to not be an ass. Try to help people out. Do no harm. Do good to others. I know that they put that stuff there. It's kind of common sense, but, obviously that's an issue within organizations when people aren't nice and aren't supportive. So try to do your best when it comes to that. Must have understanding of firewalls and VPN solutions. Again, they don't list off a particular one, but understanding what firewalls are, application layer gateways, layer 7 firewalls, stateful firewalls, how you might implement a firewall in an environment, where you want to use those. VPN solutions, again, IPsec versus SSL or TLS, site-to-site versus client-based. What else would be interesting to know there? Passphrases versus PKI. Those are all kind of things. Again, I would take that and turn that back as a question to them when they tell me, tell me what you know about firewalls and VPN solutions. Talk about the things that I just mentioned, if I had any experience with those, and then ask them specifically about what they're using in their environment. Must have hands-on experience with Cisco routers and switches. Yeah, I think that's probably pretty pretty straightforward at this point as far as what's expected within most environments for a network engineer. Talk about what it is that you know, what you've configured. If you haven't configured stuff, you could talk about your knowledge base that you have. Again, take credit for the things that you've done, even if it's not in a work environment. So if there's things that you've done in your lab, if there's things that you've done with Packet Tracer, if there's skills that you've built, hit on those, even if it's something you haven't done in a production environment. Must be able to configure wireless devices. Okay, that can mean a few different things. If they're talking about end devices and connecting them to a Wi-Fi network, or if they're talking about access points and wireless LAN controllers. Those are different things. You want to know the differences between those. Again, that can get into passphrases versus PKI. No, not to use WEP and other weak encryption standards, that type of stuff. Be of high aptitude and keen on detail. That is such a fluff statement to add. Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back up to the strong analytical abilities. I like that better. But the more that you can search out information and research it on your own, and even if you don't know the answer and you aren't able to find the answer, if you can then go to a senior level engineer and been like, I'm having problem X, I've done A, B, and C. Those haven't worked for me. I went and researched and found these 3 things, but those don't seem to line up. I'm kind of stuck. That will take you a lot farther than I didn't Google anything. I don't know. It's not working. It's not really a good mindset to have as an engineer. Systems, Windows, Cisco, Unix, and Linux. Be aware of those. I mean, again, it depends on what they're doing in their environment and what you're going to be responsible for. So talk about what you've had experience with, what you're familiar with. These are one of those things where, since they don't really go into it too much, if you don't have a Linux certification, that's not going to be a big deal. They don't really call it out. I mean, they talk about down here, being familiar with. Yeah, okay. I don't know. That really depends on the environment and the customer and what it is that they're using. In that case, I would talk about what I am familiar with and ask questions specifically about the ones I'm not familiar with, and yeah, try to appease them in some way with that. Again, you're never going to hit 100% of the things that are on these lists, so you want to talk really good about the things that you are familiar with versus the things that you aren't familiar with. And things that you aren't familiar with, you can kind of ask more specific questions, so at least shows that you know how to ask the right questions. Networking, they completely covered all of this stuff before, kind of in the higher level stuff, especially when we're talking about network essentials. The only thing that is on here that they didn't talk about before is SNMP, STP, and DNS. So SNMP, Simple Network Management Protocol, we use that for monitoring different types of system information. STP, Spanning Tree Protocol, and which helps you avoid loops, switching loops in your network. And DNS, we all know what DNS is and how when it breaks, everything breaks. So, being able to talk about those, you might not necessarily have actually had to configure any of these, but knowing what they are probably would suffice in that case. You don't necessarily meet a whole bunch of network engineers that maybe, have been a network engineer and also been the administrator on a DNS server. It's not necessarily the case or something that they do. And we talked about Unix and Microsoft. Job requirements, knowledge of Workstation OS, Windows, how to use Windows. You don't have to be, an AD admin or anything like that, but you know how to work your way around Windows. Probably used a command line a little bit on there. TCP/IP as it relates to subnets. We kind of talked about that under the networking fundamentals. Follow document server and network infrastructure. This makes no sense whatsoever. That looks like a typo. I figure that they probably mean follow documentation in regards to implementing or troubleshooting server and network infrastructure. So, knowledge of the maintenance and installation of Cisco networks. Again, we kind of covered that up above. LAN, WAN, medias, and protocols. Discussed that up above. Working knowledge of routing protocols. So again, this comes back to if you haven't had the experience in operational environment using something like GNS3 or Packet Tracer to actually configure routing protocols, that probably would be good. Same with the rest of these. Wireless technologies, obviously, you can do that in your house with your home wireless router. One note on this with routing protocols, unless you are working in a place which has super outdated network infrastructure and hasn't been updated or anything, please practice routing protocols that are being used. So I would focus on OSPF and BGP if it was me. I wouldn't be, it's cool to learn RIP or EIGRP just for kicks and giggles, and so you have a little bit of an understanding, but I wouldn't put too much effort into going further down the rabbit hole with those. OSPF and BGP are going to be the main ones that you're going to see. The incumbent must possess an associate's degree, an associate's of science in engineering or computer science, with 4 to 6 years of experience or equivalent work experience. Again, these are these types of things where they lay this out here, and there's probably some wiggle room here. If you have a bachelor's degree and you don't have the years of experience, if you have certain certs, you can probably play around with that and make your case. If you have 10 years of experience and you don't have the associate's degree, if you have 8 years of experience, like even if you had the 4 to 6 years of experience and you had a CCNA versus an associate's degree, these are all ways that you can kind of play with this and try to spin it so that you meet the requirements. And desired skills, this is going to overlap over most of the stuff that we already covered. Unix, Linux, Cisco, iOS server, we already talked about all that. Cisco router, switches, wireless VoIP, we already talked about. They do go into some of the VoIP products there. If you haven't had experience with those, at least in this case, applying for this job, you would want to Google them so that you at least know what they are and can talk somewhat intelligently about them and maybe ask some questions about them. Firewalls, VPN, IPS, routing protocols, we talked all about that. LAN, WAN, medias protocols, talked about that. Server class and PC hardware, Compaq, HP, IBM, and Dell. I really don't know. I mean, there's some differences, I guess, and especially if we're talking about like the ILO or management ports on some of these and the software that they use. Again, I don't think that that's really all that big of a deal when it comes to this. If you can just talk about what it was that you have used in the past or are familiar with, I think you're okay. But I don't think that that section there compared to if you have other good experience with other things is really going to cause you any type of heartburn. Workstations, Dell workstations, and then knowledge of the following network technologies: LAN, WAN, SNMP, SDP. We talked about all those. HSRP, VRRP. Okay, so those are going to be technologies that they use for resiliency with devices. So they kind of share a gateway IP between multiple devices. HSRP is a Cisco one. VRRP is vendor agnostic. Again, you don't necessarily have to have had experience with those. I've never actually implemented either of those in an operational environment, but I know what they are. I think I have done GLBP before, which is another Cisco one that kind of is a higher level version or a better version than HSRP. VSS is, I believe, creates like a virtual chassis between Cisco devices, used it on like the large 6500 series switches to be able to sync configs back and forth. GRE, generic routing encapsulation. So that's a tunneling protocol. It doesn't do any type of encryption, but oftentimes you might see it when you're sending traffic across the WAN or across the internet. IPsec, NHRP, DNS, QoS, quality of service, BGP, OSPF. You notice that these are the only routing protocols that they talked about, and we talked about being familiar with routing protocols. That would make me think not to talk about RIP or EIGRP. 802.1x, device authentication, and MPLS. So, yeah, I think that that's a pretty good breakdown of the different types of technologies that we would want a network engineer, especially a junior level network engineer, to be familiar with and be able to work with. So, if you have any questions on any of that stuff, that's cool. I'm going to start looking at the comments and questions that were coming in. So let's see. We have this one, CCNA or Network Plus to start. So Network Plus to me is going to be a little bit easier. And it's normally what I would recommend people to start with. CCNA is going to probably get you, a little bit of a better job since it's a little bit of a more higher level cert, even though it is considered an entry level network engineering cert. I think that you going for the Network Plus would be, the way to go, and then you'll be prepped for the CCNA, because the CCNA kind of has like two groups of information. It kind of has like the network fundamentals and then the Cisco specific configurations. And Network Plus is really going to be a bit more just the network fundamentals. Although, if you check out the Network Plus labs that I have, some videos, and I can actually throw those up here. Where am I pointing? I'm up here somewhere. I'll throw them up here, or a link for those in the video if you come back and watch. I do some labs that use Cisco Packet Tracer. So you actually would be, getting familiar with some hands-on Cisco stuff while looking at the objectives that are in the Network Plus certification. So that would be the way that I handled it. I got my Network Plus before I did my Cisco cert way back in the day. Let's see. Just got my CCNA about 2 weeks ago. Awesome. Congratulations. That's a big deal. That's a real freaking big deal. So that's really, really cool. I've been looking for work and was wondering what job titles I should be looking for. So that really depends on what experience you have along with the CCNA, if you've been working in IT before or if this is going to be your first IT job. I would say if you haven't been in IT before, you probably want to look for a network administrator role. Again, you might be able to find a network engineer role, but you're going to have to do really, really well in that interview. And if you don't necessarily have that experience, that might be a little bit difficult. But if you can talk intelligently enough about, all the different topics and stuff like that they're going to ask you, then yeah, you might be able to do that. Also depends on, where you live, what type of job opportunities are around you. Sometimes, smaller companies don't necessarily have the ability to have so many different tiers of engineering folks. So sometimes the engineer role is the admin role or vice versa. But I would say for sure, if you don't have any background, network admin is what you want to start with. But also keep your eye on some junior level networking engineering roles as well. I wouldn't completely cut yourself off from that. Let's see. Hope to have your Network Plus by year's end. Awesome. Yeah, Network Plus is awesome. It's a great certification, completely independent of whether or not you want to be a network engineer or not. Anybody getting into IT, I always tell them that the Network Plus, the learning objectives that are in there and the information that you're going to cover is something that's really just going to make you a better engineer, a better operations person, a better cybersecurity person. especially cybersecurity. Folks going into that and just wanting to dive in without having an understanding of how networking works. It's a tough uphill battle there, because how do you really know what it is that you're defending and how to defend it as a cybersecurity person? Uh, you really need to have a good fundamental knowledge base when it comes to that. I'd also say with that though, it doesn't necessarily mean that you actually have to go get the cert. I think just understanding the learning objectives that the cert covers is a good starting point. And obviously, if you want to go get the cert, then yeah, definitely do that. But yeah, good luck with going after the Network Plus. If you have any questions and stuff like that, hit me up. I wrote a Network Plus study guidebook, and I do a bunch of the Network Plus lab videos, so might be able to answer some questions if you got those. And this is kind of building on the earlier question. Also, I've been finding jobs that require, but then in the description they're saying they want someone with knowledge of firewalls. Yeah, I mean that's typically going to be the case. Again, if you're going after a network admin role, you might not necessarily have to do firewall stuff. I mean, firewalls really aren't all that scary once you actually get your hands on them a little bit. I mean, it's pretty much just a box that's doing ACLs. You kind of lay it out a little bit differently, where the ACLs that you do on Cisco devices are stateless, where on firewalls they're normally stateful. And then you might add in some other, security protections and stuff like that with IDSs or IPS, IDP, antivirus, and some other types of monitoring stuff. But again, I wouldn't cut yourself short just because you don't have one skill that they have listed on the thing. If you can convince them and talk good enough about the other things, then they're going to have, some comfort in the fact that, you know how to write, how to ask the right questions, and you'll be able to pick up information quickly enough. So maybe you could, learn on the job. Uh, it depends on their need for a person right away. If they've been trying to get somebody and they can't get somebody, and you happen to, check enough of the boxes, then that might be a good opportunity for you. And let's see. Basically, I find jobs I'm qualified for, but then see one or two things I'm not. Yes, 100%. Still apply. Even if you're not qualified for it, you might be qualified for enough of it. And like I said, if you have the desire to push through that and the aptitude to learn additional things, then you're gonna be fine. And one last question from Unique Gaming, and one last question I have. What are some questions they might ask? I mean, that really depends, upon what the job rec was, right? I mean, kind of like what I did here, going through and looking at the job duties and responsibilities are all going to depend upon kind of what they have laid out as far as what they're looking for. You might have some people that ask super technical questions. Other people don't do that, and they might ask you more narrative-based questions. Normally what I do when I interview people, so I look at their resume, see what they have on there, and then tell them or ask them to, explain their work history with whatever they have written down, and kind of let them direct the story as far as, what it is that they've done, what they feel comfortable with. I don't necessarily like just jumping in and technically grilling people, because I don't really find that that's indicative of real life when it comes to being a network engineer. Yes, we have fundamental knowledge that we need to be aware of. And yes, we have very specific skill sets in certain things as we build up that expertise. But really, as I mentioned, it's about documentation, researching, and troubleshooting. And so, I don't know, sometimes that's hard to get that to come through if you're just like grilling somebody with technical questions one after the other. And then they feel bad because, they don't know which type of encryption algorithm Cisco uses for their passwords when you set the secret password to use type 8 versus type 9 encryption. Like, seriously, it's not that big of a deal. That's things that you can Google. the fact that you know that you need to use strong encryption when you are putting a password into a Cisco device is the important thing. Not necessarily that you can tell me, the key length difference between Type 8 and Type 9. It's kind of, at least my perspective on it. I don't think catching people in gotchas or gotcha questions in interviews is it's kind of a dick move. And so that's not my style. Let's see. I got the JNCIA in December of 2020, and then 3 weeks into DevOps, I just decided to get on the CCNA track. I'm currently working with Cisco. Awesome. So I assume when you say JNCIA, you're talking about the Junos one. And so obviously, if you did that and you passed that, then you have pretty decent networking fundamentals. Because the JNCI Junos doesn't really teach networking fundamentals. It kind of assumes that you already have that Network Plus base level, unlike the CCNA, which is kind of going to teach that and then teach the Cisco stuff up above that. So congrats on the JNCI Junos. The DevOps one, I enjoyed that one just because I don't use the DevOps type of stuff. I don't do DevOps work. So learning about, Ansible and Python and JSON, XML were all kind of cool things to me. Anybody who has any interest in any of the Juniper certs, I've done so many videos on those and practice test walkthroughs. Go ahead and check those out too. Highly recommend that. They still have all the free training, 75% off, discount code whenever you pass their voucher exams. So I love Juniper. And we can talk about Juniper all day long too. And then the last part is you're currently working with Cisco Packet Tracer. Awesome. Cisco Packet Tracer it's great for free. You are going to have some limitations with that in some ways, although I think you're pretty much going to be able to do almost everything you need to do from a CCNA perspective. If you haven't checked out my Network Plus Practical Lab videos, they are actually completely applicable to the CCNA. I also have a few CCNA Practical Lab videos as well. So that might help you out a little bit. And so good luck with that. Hit me up if you got any other questions on that as you're going through those. Let's see. Any other comments or questions before we wrap this up? Still got a whole bunch of people in here watching the stream, so I appreciate all of you staying in here. Hope this was useful and beneficial, and it was able to kind of break things down in a way that kind of made sense for you. But if you do have any questions or comments on this or anything else, then now is the time to drop those in there. I'm going to take a sip of water real quick. Let's see. Unique game. Is there exam topics for the JNCIA? Yes. So go check out my... I just did a video breaking down the fact that I passed all 6 of the Juniper Associate Certs this past year. If you go watch that video, I put in links for all of the necessary training and objectives and practice test videos, all that stuff. It's all there. I've all laid it out. You can look and see what the objectives are. The JNCI Juno cert is kind of like the routing and switching cert. So it's kind of their equivalent to the CCNA, except for the fact that it doesn't cover networking fundamentals the way that the CCNA does. But it's really, it's a really good cert. I think it's one of those things where if I see somebody come in for interview and they have Juniper certs on their resume, then I know that they're kind of serious isn't the right word, because tons of people are serious, but I'm just happy to know that they're kind of interested in learning other things besides Cisco. Because Cisco's king of the jungle, we all use Cisco, but Juniper is awesome as well, so I like to see that. And yep, so if nobody has any other comments or questions, then we can go ahead and wrap this up. If you stayed all the way to the end and you're still here, then I appreciate it if you hit the like button on the video. And if you stayed all this way and you aren't subscribed to my channel, I don't know what to tell you. Hit the subscribe button. I appreciate that. Um, Check out my Twitch stuff too. I'm actually trying to put out a video almost every single day on Twitch. Um, I'm working on a how to build a secure network video series right now. So these are going to be little 5 minute long videos. I'm going to try to put out one every single day. So let's see. Another comment came in. I'm a field service technician for network connected lottery machines. Oh, that's interesting. Um, we do some layer 7 and layer 6 work. I'm looking to go in the into the direction of network admin. Any advice on how to make this transfer? Um, so I guess I'd be interested to know what that actually entails as a service technician for the lottery machines. So you don't have to do any configurations, um, and where this is at. So are we talking like lottery machines, like you buy a ticket, like in a gas station type of lottery machines, or we're talking like slot machines that they put different places? And do you have to do any administration of the switch ports that those are connected to, or is it pretty much you're involved with the IPing of the devices and relaying the port information? When I say port, I don't mean like physical port. I mean like ports and protocols information that the client that you're connecting to has to open up in their firewalls, and probably syncing back to some type of server somewhere else and stuff like that. Um, I think, I mean, just thinking that through my head, I think that you probably um, have a lot of the good fundamental network information there, um, especially just from a job perspective. Uh, I would look at. I mean, do you have any certifications to go along with that? Uh, Also depends on where you're working and what the job market is like there. But I would think that it probably would not be that hard to make that type of transfer. Um, just depending upon how you can kind of spin your experience in a way where you're able to highlight all of that, the different things that you've done that correlate to networking and protocols and things like that. But yeah, I hit me up on Twitter actually, if you're on Twitter, because I'd be interested in talking to you about this a little bit more. Let's see. Do I think the CCNP is necessary? For what? I guess. Um, I mean, it's a good cert. It's a great cert. I got my CCNP after I got my CCNA, and then did a CCIE written, and kept doing that for years, maybe I don't know, 8 or 9 years after I got my CCNP. Um, do you need it to be a senior network engineer? No. I know a lot of great senior network engineers that don't have any certifications. Is it a good way for you to be able to gain knowledge about things that might be outside the scope of the work that you're doing in your current environment? Hell yes. So if you're kind of limited in the things that you're doing and responsible for, reading a few CCNP books and doing some labs will introduce you to a whole lot of technology that you might not be familiar with, and that will make you a better engineer. Whether or not you actually go down the path of getting the CCNP is going to be up to you. Getting the certification definitely will make it easier to open doors for interviews, especially for more senior engineering positions. But like I said, it's not necessary. But I think it's a great cert. So uh, it's in the Philadelphia area. Okay, so there should be plenty of different types of job opportunities up there, and you're getting Network Plus next month. I think that's a great step, going after the Network Plus. I think that coupled with your job experience, yeah, I think you should be able to articulate that in a way that you should be able to get your foot in the door for a network admin role, for sure. Let's see. And any other comments, questions, queries, concerns, salutations, anything before we hit the road here? It's been almost an hour. That's crazy. I'm surprised I actually didn't go through like 2 of these things. Yeah. So again, appreciate all of you hanging out and dropping in and asking questions. Hope it helped. I'm gonna do a few more of these as well. Maybe some stuff for some cyber roles and maybe some systems engineering stuff. So, all right, I will chat with all of you later. Hope you have a great week. Everybody that's in the South dealing with all the storms, hope that you are staying safe. We're about to get hit with some storms here on the East Coast, so everybody here, hope you stay safe as well. All right, I will talk to y'all later. Bye.